I will pay any price for protection, even if the person standing before me is the one man everyone fears. Clara Bennett never expected those words to lead her to the most powerful alpha in Silverpine Kingdom. She had spent years building a quiet life away from the attention of nobles and powerful families. But everything changed when the secrets surrounding her family name began drawing unwanted attention. Clara was an Omega who had learned early in life that the world often judged people before knowing their stories. She was not born into luxury, did not have a powerful pack behind her, and did not have the protection that many others were given. But she had something she refused to lose: her independence. Living in a small countryside home surrounded by fields and forests, Clara worked as a healer and studied ancient remedies passed down through generations. She helped villagers, cared for injured animals, and offered kindness without expecting anything in return. Yet beneath her peaceful life was a truth she could no longer ignore. She needed someone powerful enough to stand beside her, someone who could protect her when she could no longer protect herself. The name everyone whispered when speaking about strength and authority was Adrian Blackwood, the King Alpha of Silverpine Kingdom. He was a ruler known across the land for his discipline, his wisdom, and his unmatched presence. Many believed he belonged only on the throne, surrounded by royal advisors and matters of the kingdom. No one imagined he would accept a personal protection request from an ordinary Omega. But Clara had no other choice. When she entered the grand halls of the royal palace, she expected to meet a distant ruler who would refuse her request. Instead, she found a man whose calm expression revealed nothing about what he was thinking. Adrian listened quietly as Clara explained her situation. She did not beg. She did not try to impress him. She simply told the truth. "I do not need someone to fight my battles for me," Clara said. "I need someone who can make sure I have the chance to face them." Those words surprised him. Most people approached the Alpha King because they wanted power, influence, or favors. Clara asked for something different. She asked for protection, but she still wanted to stand on her own. Adrian studied her carefully before giving his answer. "You understand that my time is valuable," he said. Clara nodded. "I understand. That is why I am willing to pay for it." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Adrian accepted the request. The agreement was simple. He would become her personal guardian until the dangers surrounding her disappeared. There would be clear boundaries. There would be no unnecessary attachment. It would be a duty, nothing more. At least, that was what Adrian believed when he accepted the role. Clara believed she was hiring the strongest protector in the kingdom. Adrian believed he was accepting another responsibility. Neither of them understood that this arrangement would change both of their lives. Because the Omega who needed protection was not someone waiting to be saved. And the Alpha King who agreed to guard her was about to discover that protecting her would become far more personal than he ever expected. The agreement between Clara Bennett and King Alpha Adrian Blackwood began with simple rules. Adrian would protect her. Clara would follow his guidance when necessary. Their arrangement would remain professional, and neither of them would allow emotions to interfere with the responsibility. At least, that was the plan. When Adrian arrived at Clara's countryside home, he expected to find someone fragile and afraid. Instead, he found an Omega who was already standing on her own. Clara welcomed him calmly, showing him the small house where she lived and the quiet routine she had built for herself. There were shelves filled with healing books, carefully organized herbs, and notes from years of research. Nothing about her life showed weakness. It showed determination. Adrian noticed this immediately. Many people who came to him for protection wanted him to solve every problem for them. Clara did not. She simply wanted someone strong enough to stand beside her while she continued fighting for her own future. "You do not have to watch every step I take," Clara told him as she prepared her supplies. "I only need to know that if something unexpected happens, I will not face it alone." Adrian looked at her with quiet curiosity. He was used to people seeing him as a title before seeing him as a person. But Clara spoke to him differently. She spoke to him as if he was simply Adrian. Not the King Alpha, not the ruler of Silverpine Kingdom, just a man who had agreed to help. For someone who had spent years surrounded by respect mixed with fear, that honesty felt unusual. The first days of his assignment were exactly what Adrian expected. He watched. He listened. He stayed close enough to protect her. But he quickly realized Clara was not the kind of person who needed constant direction. She had confidence in her choices. She knew the people in her village by name. She remembered their struggles. She spent her time helping others, even though her own life was not easy. One afternoon, Adrian watched as Clara gave away some of her rare herbs to an elderly villager who could not afford proper medicine. She did not hesitate. She did not mention what she had sacrificed. She simply smiled and said, "Someone helped me when I needed it. I want to do the same." Those words stayed with him. Adrian had protected the kingdom for years, but he began wondering how many people like Clara existed beyond the palace walls. People who carried quiet strength without anyone noticing. As the days passed, the distance between them slowly changed. Clara started trusting his presence. Adrian started noticing the small details about her. He noticed when she was tired but refused to complain. He noticed how the entire village looked for her when they needed comfort. He noticed that the Omega he was hired to protect was always protecting others first. Yet Adrian reminded himself of the agreement. This was a duty, nothing more. He was the Alpha King assigned to guard an Omega who needed security. But every time Clara smiled, every time she showed kindness without expecting anything, that simple explanation became harder to believe. Because Adrian was beginning to understand something unexpected. Clara Bennett was not someone who needed a powerful alpha to give her strength. She already had strength of her own. And for the first time in years, Adrian found himself curious about someone not because of their position, but because of the person they truly were. The role of protector was supposed to be simple. Adrian Blackwood had accepted countless responsibilities as the King Alpha of Silverpine Kingdom, and guarding Clara Bennett was meant to be just another duty. He believed he understood the arrangement. He would keep her safe. He would remain professional. When the assignment ended, he would return to the palace and continue his life as a ruler. But the more time Adrian spent with Clara, the more he realized she was not someone who fit the expectations he had created in his mind. Clara was not waiting for someone to save her. She was already fighting for herself every day. One morning, Adrian followed her through the village as she delivered healing supplies to families who needed them. He watched as people greeted her warmly, not because she had a powerful name, but because she had earned their trust. Children smiled when she passed. Older villagers thanked her for remembering their needs. Even the smallest details mattered to her. She noticed when someone was struggling. She noticed when someone needed encouragement. Adrian quietly observed everything. He had spent years surrounded by people who approached him because of his crown. They respected the Alpha King, but few people ever tried to understand the man beneath the title. Clara was different. She did not change her behavior when he entered a room. She did not become nervous because of his position. She simply continued being herself. That honesty fascinated him. Later that day, Adrian found Clara organizing her supplies inside her home. He noticed that many of the items she used were old and carefully repaired. "You could replace these," he said. Clara looked at the tools and smiled. "They still work. There is no reason to waste something valuable." Adrian paused. Her answer reminded him of the way she treated people. She never discarded anything simply because it was imperfect. She believed everything had worth, including those the world ignored. As the weeks passed, Adrian began noticing small habits he never expected to remember. He noticed Clara always carried extra medicine for unexpected situations. He noticed she checked on her neighbors even after a long day. He noticed she thanked everyone who helped her, no matter how small the gesture was. These details should not have mattered to a king, yet somehow they did. One evening, Clara and Adrian sat outside her home while the sunset painted the sky above the countryside. For a rare moment, there was no palace, no title, and no responsibility between them. "Do you ever get tired?" Adrian asked. Clara looked surprised. "Of what?" "Always caring about everyone else." Clara thought quietly before answering. "Sometimes. But I would rather be tired from helping than empty from ignoring people." Her words remained with him long after the conversation ended. Adrian had spent his entire life believing strength meant carrying burdens alone. Clara showed him another kind of strength. The kind that came from compassion. The kind that did not need recognition. He still reminded himself that this was only a contract. She had hired him to protect her. Nothing more. But something inside him was beginning to change. Adrian was no longer watching Clara because she was his responsibility. He was watching her because every day revealed another reason to admire her. And for the first time in years, the Alpha King who had always protected others found himself wondering what it would feel like to have someone protect his heart. The days continued to pass in the quiet countryside. But something between Clara Bennett and Adrian Blackwood had changed. Neither of them could clearly explain when it happened. There was no single moment, no dramatic promise, no sudden realization. It was hidden in small conversations, shared silences, and the growing understanding that they were no longer strangers. Adrian still followed the rules he had created when he accepted the assignment. He remained watchful. He remained careful. He reminded himself every morning that he was there because Clara had hired him. Yet his actions began to reveal something his words refused to admit. He noticed when the weather became colder and made sure Clara had a warmer cloak nearby. He remembered which herbs she preferred to use and which ones she avoided. He quietly adjusted his schedule whenever she needed extra support in the village. Clara noticed these things, even if she never mentioned them. She had expected a powerful alpha king to be distant and formal. Instead, she discovered a man who paid attention to details that most people overlooked. One afternoon, Clara and Adrian traveled to a nearby village to deliver supplies. The journey was peaceful, and Clara spent most of the time explaining the plants that grew along the path. Adrian listened carefully, something that surprised her. "You really listen to everything people say?" Clara told him. Adrian looked at her with a slight smile. "I am a king. Listening is part of my responsibility." Clara shook her head gently. "No. Many rulers hear words. Very few actually listen." Her answer stayed in his thoughts. Adrian had spent years attending meetings where people carefully chose every sentence around him. Clara never did that. She spoke honestly, even when she disagreed with him. She treated him with respect, but she never treated him like someone above her. For the first time in a long while, Adrian felt seen instead of admired. That evening, they returned to Clara's home as the sky turned gold. She prepared a simple meal, and Adrian found himself enjoying the peaceful moment more than the grand celebrations held inside the palace. The quietness felt unfamiliar, yet comforting. "Do you miss being in the palace?" Clara asked. Adrian looked toward the distant mountains. "Sometimes, but there are moments when being away reminds me what the kingdom is truly made of." Clara smiled softly. "People are more than their titles." Adrian looked at her, realizing that she had unknowingly reminded him of a lesson he had forgotten. As the Alpha King, he had spent years protecting traditions, borders, and the future of Silver Pine Kingdom. But Clara showed him that a kingdom was not only built by powerful leaders. It was built by ordinary people who cared for each other. Later that night, Adrian stood outside beneath the stars, thinking about the promise he had made to remain professional. He had accepted a contract. He had agreed to become Clara's protector, but the truth was becoming harder to ignore. He was no longer simply guarding an Omega because it was his duty. He was beginning to care because Clara had become someone he did not want to lose from his life. And somewhere between protection and responsibility, the Alpha King had started to forget where the job ended and where his feelings began. Adrian Blackwood had faced countless challenges as the King Alpha of Silver Pine Kingdom, but none had ever confused him the way Clara Bennett did. He understood battles of strategy, decisions that affected thousands of lives, and the weight of responsibility that came with his crown. Those things were familiar. What was unfamiliar was the quiet feeling that appeared whenever he was near an Omega who never asked for anything beyond simple respect. Clara continued living her life as she always had. She still helped villagers, studied healing methods, and found ways to bring comfort to those around her. She never acted differently because the Alpha King was beside her. She never tried to use his attention for personal gain. That was exactly what made Adrian notice her even more. One morning, Clara found Adrian repairing a broken wooden shelf inside her home. She stopped at the doorway, surprised by the sight of the powerful ruler handling something so ordinary. "I did not expect the King Alpha to know how to fix furniture," she said with a small smile. Adrian looked up calmly. A ruler should understand the things people depend on every day. Clara watched him quietly. It was another reminder that beneath the title and authority was a man who carried a deeper sense of responsibility than most people realized. As time passed, their relationship became less like a formal agreement and more like a partnership. Adrian still introduced himself as her protector, but Clara began noticing that he treated her concerns as if they mattered personally. When she worried about a struggling family in the village, he listened. When she questioned decisions that affected ordinary people, he considered her perspective. The Alpha King, who once believed leadership meant standing above others, was learning to stand beside them. One afternoon, Clara and Adrian walked through the village market. The people greeted them warmly, but Clara noticed something unusual. They were not looking at Adrian with fear or distance. They were watching him with appreciation because of the way he treated those around him. "You have changed," Clara said quietly. Adrian looked at her. "Have I?" She nodded. "You used to look at everything like a responsibility. Now you look at people like they matter." Her words reached deeper than she realized. Adrian had spent years protecting the kingdom, but he had rarely allowed himself to experience the simple connections that made life meaningful. Clara had shown him a different kind of strength. Not the strength of authority, the strength of compassion. That evening, Adrian reviewed the agreement they had signed when he accepted the role. The words were clear. He was hired to protect Clara Bennett. The arrangement had a beginning and an ending. Yet the thought of leaving when the time came felt strangely difficult. He closed the document and looked out toward the quiet countryside. For the first time, he admitted something he had tried to ignore. His concern for Clara was no longer part of a contract. It was personal. Meanwhile, Clara found herself facing a similar realization. She had hired the strongest protector in the kingdom because she needed security. But somewhere along the way, Adrian became more than that. He became the person she trusted most. Neither of them spoke the truth aloud yet, but both understood that something had changed. The Alpha King was no longer simply guarding an Omega. And the Omega who never wanted to depend on anyone had slowly become the one person who made the Alpha King want to stay. The quiet days in the countryside had become something Adrian Blackwood never expected to value. As the King Alpha of Silverpine Kingdom, he had always believed his life belonged to duty. Every decision, every moment, and every responsibility existed for the sake of the kingdom. There had never been room for anything personal. But Clara Bennett had slowly changed the way he saw the world. She did not demand his attention. She did not seek his power. She simply lived with kindness. And somehow that was enough to make the strongest alpha in the kingdom stop and notice. One morning, Adrian received a message from the palace requesting his return for an important council meeting. Normally, he would have welcomed the opportunity to return to his usual responsibilities. Instead, his first thought was about Clara. He wondered if she would be safe while he was away. He wondered if she would remember to rest instead of spending every hour helping others. The realization surprised him. For years, Adrian had protected entire villages and territories without hesitation. Yet the thought of leaving one Omega alone created a feeling he could not easily explain. When Clara saw the message, she immediately understood. "You should go," she said. "The kingdom needs its King Alpha." Adrian looked at her. "And what about you?" Clara smiled gently. "I have survived before you came. I will survive while you are gone." Her confidence should have made him feel relieved. Instead, it reminded him of something important. Clara never needed him because she was weak. She allowed him beside her because she trusted him. That difference meant more than he expected. Before leaving, Adrian noticed a small package on the table. Clara handed it to him. Inside were carefully prepared herbs and a handwritten note explaining how to use them after long days of work. "For someone who spends all his time protecting others, you should remember to take care of yourself too," she said. Adrian held the package quietly. No one had ever spoken to him that way. People always asked what he could provide. Clara was the first person who reminded him that he was also someone who needed care. During the journey back to the palace, Adrian found himself thinking about her words. He realized the most powerful people were often the ones who carried the heaviest burdens silently. Clara understood that better than anyone. Meanwhile, Clara returned to her normal routine, but something felt different. The small house felt quieter without Adrian's steady presence. She missed their conversations, his thoughtful observations, and the calm feeling that came from knowing someone truly understood her. She reminded herself that he was the King Alpha, and their connection existed because of an agreement. But her heart did not seem interested in following the rules they had written. When Adrian returned to the palace, he expected to feel like himself again. Instead, he found himself looking at the world differently. The grand halls, the endless meetings, and the expectations of his title all felt strangely distant. Because somewhere beyond the palace walls was an Omega who had shown him a truth he had forgotten. A person's value was never measured by their position. It was measured by the kindness they carried. And for the first time, Adrian understood that protecting Clara was no longer about fulfilling a duty. It was about protecting someone who had become important to him in a way he could no longer ignore. When Adrian Blackwood returned to Silver Pine Palace, everyone expected the King Alpha to become the same ruler he had always been. Calm, focused, untouched by personal concerns. But those closest to him noticed something different. Adrian still carried the same authority, but there was a quiet change in the way he looked at the world. The palace that once felt like the center of his existence now felt incomplete. His thoughts often traveled beyond the grand walls and toward a small countryside home where an Omega named Clara Bennett had unknowingly changed him. During council meetings, Adrian found himself considering questions he had never asked before. Were the decisions being made truly helping the people who needed support? Were the voices of ordinary villagers being heard? These were thoughts Clara had placed in his mind without ever trying to influence him. She had simply shown him another way to lead. Meanwhile, Clara continued her daily life, but she noticed the absence of Adrian more than she expected. She still worked, helped villagers, and cared for her healing studies, yet the quiet moments reminded her of the conversations they shared. She missed the way he listened without judgment. She missed the feeling that someone finally understood the weight she carried. Still, Clara refused to believe that an Alpha King could truly care about someone like her. She reminded herself that Adrian had only accepted a responsibility, nothing more. When Adrian finally returned to the countryside, Clara welcomed him with the same gentle smile she always had. She did not ask why he came back sooner than expected. She did not question the concern in his eyes. She simply offered him a warm drink and asked about the kingdom. That simple gesture affected him more than she realized. "You are not going to ask why I returned?" Adrian asked. Clara looked at him curiously. "Should I?" He was quiet for a moment. Most people would have searched for hidden reasons behind his actions. Clara accepted them without expecting anything. "You always carry so much responsibility," she said softly. "Maybe you needed a place where you did not have to be the King Alpha for a while." Adrian felt the truth of her words. Clara saw the person behind the title. She saw the man who was often forgotten beneath the expectations of leadership. As the days passed, Adrian spent more time near Clara, and the boundaries between duty and personal connection became harder to define. He still protected her, but now he also shared his thoughts with her. He still watched over her safety, but he also cared about her happiness. One evening, they sat outside Clara's home beneath the fading light. Adrian finally admitted something he had avoided. "When I accepted this assignment, I thought I was protecting you because it was my duty." Clara looked at him quietly. "And now?" Adrian looked toward the horizon before answering. "Now I know some people are worth protecting because they matter." Clara did not respond immediately. She simply looked at him with a warmth that made the silence feel meaningful. Neither of them spoke about what was growing between them, but both understood that their connection was no longer just an agreement. The Alpha King who once believed emotions were a distraction had discovered something unexpected. Sometimes the person who needed protection was also the person who gave you a reason to become better. The connection between Clara Bennett and Adrian Blackwood had grown stronger with every passing day, but neither of them had spoken openly about what it meant. They both understood that something had changed, yet they were careful not to rush what had naturally developed between them. Clara still saw Adrian as the King Alpha who carried the weight of an entire kingdom. Adrian still saw Clara as the Omega he had promised to protect. But somewhere between those two identities, they had discovered something far more meaningful, a bond built on trust. When Adrian returned with Clara to Silver Pine Palace, he noticed the difference immediately. The same halls that once felt familiar now seemed distant. The palace was filled with advisors, traditions, and expectations, but Clara brought a sense of honesty that the royal world rarely offered. Some members of the court noticed the change in their king. They saw how carefully Adrian listened when Clara spoke. They noticed that the Alpha King valued her opinions instead of simply giving orders. For some, this was difficult to understand. They had always believed power came from authority alone. They could not understand why a ruler would consider the thoughts of an Omega from a quiet village. Clara noticed the hesitation around her, but she refused to let it change who she was. She did not enter the palace seeking a title. She did not want attention or influence. She simply wanted to continue helping people the way she always had. One afternoon, Adrian found Clara in the palace garden speaking with the royal healers. She was sharing ideas about improving care for villagers outside the capital. She spoke with confidence, but never arrogance. She listened to others and welcomed their suggestions. Adrian watched quietly from a distance, realizing something important. Clara was not trying to become part of his world. She was showing his world what it had been missing. Later, Adrian joined her in the garden. You realize many people would use this opportunity to gain power, he said. Clara looked at him with a gentle expression. Power is only valuable if it helps someone. Her answer reminded him why he trusted her. She had never been impressed by his crown. She cared about the person wearing it. That evening, Adrian made a decision. He would no longer hide the importance Clara had in his life simply because others might misunderstand. He had spent years making choices based on what was expected of him. But Clara had taught him that a true leader also needed the courage to choose what was right. The next day, Adrian stood before the royal council and spoke honestly about Clara's role. He explained that her value was not determined by her status as an Omega, but by her character, her wisdom, and the kindness she brought to the kingdom. Clara stood beside him, calm and composed. She did not need him to speak for her, but she appreciated that he stood with her. In that moment, she understood something she had never expected. The man she hired for protection was no longer simply guarding her from the world. He was standing beside her against the doubts of the world. And Adrian finally accepted the truth he could no longer deny. Clara Bennett was not just someone he was responsible for protecting. She was someone he had chosen to protect. The kingdom of Silverpine had changed in ways no one expected. Not because of a new law, a powerful alliance, or a great ceremony, but because one Omega had reminded everyone what true strength looked like. Clara Bennett never entered the palace hoping to change the world. She only wanted to live honestly, help those who needed her, and find a way to protect herself when life became uncertain. Yet her quiet kindness reached further than she ever imagined. Adrian Blackwood had once believed being an Alpha King meant carrying every burden alone. He believed emotions created weakness, and that a ruler had to remain distant to make the right decisions. But Clara showed him something he had forgotten. A kingdom was not protected only by walls, traditions, or authority. It was protected by understanding the hearts of the people living within it. Weeks after Adrian openly supported Clara before the council, the palace began to feel different. The advisors who once questioned her slowly began to see the value she brought. They saw her dedication to healing, her patience with others, and the respect she earned without demanding it. Clara did not change because she received recognition. She remained the same person who had always helped villagers, cared for others, and believed every life had meaning. Adrian admired that more than anything. One evening, Adrian and Clara stood together on the palace balcony overlooking Silverpine Kingdom. The lights of the villages below shimmered across the land, and for a moment, the responsibilities of the crown felt distant. When I first met you, I thought I was protecting someone who needed my strength, Adrian said quietly. Clara looked at him. And now? Adrian smiled softly. Now I know I was protecting someone who reminded me what strength truly is. Clara lowered her gaze, touched by his words. She had spent much of her life believing she had to prove her worth because the world saw her as an Omega with limited power. But Adrian never asked her to become someone else. He saw the value she already carried. Their journey had started as an agreement. A simple arrangement between an Omega seeking protection and an Alpha King accepting a responsibility. But somewhere along the way, it became something neither of them planned. It became trust. It became respect. It became a connection built not on status or expectations, but on seeing each other clearly. Adrian remained the King Alpha of Silverpine Kingdom, and Clara remained the Omega who had always followed her own path. They did not need to change who they were to stand together. They only needed to understand that their differences were what brought them closer. The villagers who once overlooked Clara now spoke of her with admiration. The people of the kingdom began to recognize that compassion was not a weakness. It was a different kind of power. And Adrian, the Alpha King who had once believed he needed to protect everyone alone, finally discovered that even the strongest person could find peace beside someone who understood them. Clara thought she was hiring a protector because she needed someone to stand between her and the world. But in the end, she found someone who stood beside her instead. And Adrian learned that the greatest responsibility he had ever accepted was not guarding an Omega. It was cherishing the person who taught him that a gentle heart could change an entire kingdom.